4 continents in the corner, and Great Britain has been made much larger in scale.
When workers kicked off routine maintenance inside Camilla's private estate, nobody expected to stumble upon a hidden chamber tucked behind her son's bedroom wall. What they found wasn't just some dusty old storage, it was a secret loaded with memory, grief, and buried history. Yeah, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it got kinda crowded. A whispered confession echoed through the walls. Among the dust and shadows lay something so personal, so haunting, it reopened wounds everyone thought were long dead. But what emerged from that darkness? Even the royal family was left speechless. This is the jaw-dropping discovery, the day a routine inspection exploded into a revelation that could shake the monarchy to its core. The morning started quiet, workers moving room to room, tapping walls, checking for cracks, leaks, anything that might make the mansion unsafe over time. Their mission? Simple. But none of them were ready for what lurked in the most unlikely corner, the bedroom of Tom Parker BS, Camilla's eldest son. It started small. While surveying a wall, a worker noticed a faint, uneven line hidden beneath layers of plaster and behind a decorative panel. At first glance, it looked like the usual wear and tear, the kind of cracks that pop up in old houses where time leaves its fingerprints. Harmless, right? But this seam, it felt different. Too deliberate, too hidden. Curiosity kicked in. A gentle knock on the surface sent back a hollow thud. Not stone, not brick, but something else. The wall was hiding a space, a secret, and everyone present felt the chill of discovering something they weren't meant to see. The workers shot nervous glances at one another. This wasn't just some ordinary flaw in the wall. Something had been hidden here, deliberately, silently, for decades. Protocol kicked in immediately. Nothing could be touched until the higher-ups were called. Within minutes, estate security swarmed in, followed by palace officials with orders sharper than knives. The vibe shifted fast. From casual inspection to tense, electric urgency. Guards locked down the door while the workers stepped back, the bedroom transforming into a stage where history itself seemed ready to drop its bombshell. Under strict supervision, the plaster around the suspicious seam was chipped away. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Each tap of the tool echoed like a heartbeat, as if the walls themselves were resisting. Then, finally, the panel loosened and swung open, revealing a dark, dust-choked cavity hidden behind it. What lay inside wasn't the product of age or neglect. This wasn't some random, forgotten renovation. It was deliberate, a concealment executed with surgical precision. The space was tight, suffocating, air thick with decades of secrets. Whoever sealed it had gone to lengths to make sure its contents never saw the light without force. Officials peered inside, flashlights cutting through the gloom, while workers held their breath. Everyone understood. This was far beyond a simple hidden flaw. This was a secret buried in stone and plaster, daring to be discovered. The revelation unsettled every soul in the room. For a chilling moment, it was clear. They weren't just dealing with walls or renovations. They were standing on the threshold of a mystery loaded with intent, secrecy, and maybe even scandal. A secret long locked behind Tom's wall now threatens to tear the monarchy's silence wide open. But what kind of truth was so dangerous it had to be buried for decades? Now, let's see how a hidden passage led to a chest loaded with deadly secrets. The corridor of silence. When the last fragments of plaster fell away, the sight beyond sent a chill racing through the room. Hidden for decades, a narrow corridor stretched out, blanketed in dust and suffocating silence. The air that escaped was heavy, stale, almost choking, like time itself had been trapped in there with no way out. Every cautious step felt less like discovery and more like trespassing into something meant to stay buried forever. This wasn't a royal escape route. No grand passageway lined with arches or broad stone steps to whisk a monarch to safety. This corridor was tight, suffocating, walls pressing in, forcing every movement to be careful, tense. It didn't offer protection, it demanded secrecy. It wasn't made to save, it was made to hide. The deeper they ventured, the creepier it became. Dust clung to clothes and faces, cobwebs hung like veils of forgotten memories, and the faint rustle of unseen creatures echoed in the heavy silence. Decades of absence had left this space untouched, like the outside world had moved on while this corridor remained frozen in airless time. Then, At the very end, the flashlight beams hit something that stopped every breath in the room, something that made the heart pound, something waiting for them to find it. There it stood, an iron-bound chest, squat and unyielding, its wood warped by centuries yet still solid, blackened iron bands gripping it like a fortress of the past. Thick dust coated its surface, but even beneath that grey cloak the chest radiated intent. This wasn't left here by accident. Its position was perfect, centered in the alcove as if chosen with care, waiting for the exact moment it would be found. The lock, though rusted, caught the light with a quiet defiance. Whoever had sealed this chest wanted it closed, wanted it preserved, wanted its secrets locked away no matter how long it took. This wasn't clutter or a forgotten trunk left behind in chaos. This was deliberate, a monument to secrecy, a message buried with purpose. The silence of the corridor pressed down heavier than ever, making the chest feel alive, almost warning those who dared approach. The discovery didn't feel like victory. It felt like intrusion, as if they had broken into a chamber where the past demanded obedience, and even the air whispered, "Do not disturb." What truths did this chest guard? Why had it been hidden so carefully, locked in a corridor meant not for escape, but for erasure? Questions swirled, heavy and uneasy, each one darker than the last. This was no accident. This was intention, a burden from history, waiting, perhaps unwillingly, to be unearthed. The chest hadn't been waiting to be found, it had been waiting to be opened. But what lay inside? Jewels? Forgotten heirlooms? Or something far more dangerous? Something that could shake the crown itself? Let's see. The narrow corridor was already thick with anticipation, but when the iron-bound chest was finally dragged into the open, silence fell like a weighty blanket. Its sheer bulk screamed importance, and the lock clung with decades of stubborn resolve. As the final hinge groaned and the lid creaked upward, everyone in the room froze. Hearts raced with the wild hope of gold, jewels, or priceless royal treasures, relics fit for kings and queens. That hope vanished in an instant. No glittering crowns, no sparkling gemstones. Instead, the chest held stacks of papers tied with ribbons long faded to ghostly greys and pale blues. The parchment was fragile, yellowed with age. The ink bled softly into the fibers. At first, it seemed almost ordinary, a stack of old papers where treasures had been imagined. Then the handwriting hit. Unmistakable, personal, intentional. Diana's hand. These weren't letters polished for public eyes, nor the carefully curated statements once aired in interviews. These were raw, private journals, fragments of her truth never meant for strangers. Each line throbbed with emotion, each page whispered confessions, unguarded and intimate, waiting to be read for the very first time. The words carried no filter, no performance. They were raw, unguarded outpourings of a woman who had felt invisible, unheard, trapped inside the gilded walls of royalty. The journals overflowed with honesty. Some passages throbbed with aching loneliness, painting vivid pictures of silent nights where, even surrounded by grandeur, she felt unseen. Others crackled with frustration and quiet defiance, words written against a world that refused to acknowledge her pain. And through it all ran a haunting fear that her story, her voice, could one day be silenced forever, crushed beneath the weight of the crown and its relentless machinery of image and control. What made this discovery devastating was the intimacy of the writing. These weren't public statements or curated legacies. They were letters to herself, words meant to exist only in secret. And yet, here they were, hidden behind a wall in Camilla's son's bedroom, waiting silently for decades until fate forced them into the light. For those present, the realization was staggering. These weren't relics of wealth. They were fragments of a soul. Each ribbon-bound stack carried Diana herself, her voice, her pain, her truth, resurrected in ink long after her passing. The air itself seemed charged, as if the room pulsed with her presence. This was no treasure of gold or jewels. This was far more dangerous, far more powerful. Diana's unfiltered voice refused to be erased and threatened to overturn everything the monarchy thought it had buried. Why had this secret surfaced in Tom's bedroom? Who was he in this story? Could it be that the secret was always meant to be revealed through him? the one whose life now revolved around it. What stunned both palace and public alike wasn't just the contents of the discovery, it was its astonishing location. This revelation didn't emerge from a secret royal archive or a forgotten palace chamber. Instead, it had been hidden in the most intimate, unexpected of places, behind the bedroom wall of Tom Parker BS, Camilla's eldest son. The personal nature of the setting made the find all the more shocking, all the more profound. Tom has never carried the heavy crown of royal titles, nor has he lived under the suffocating glare of monarchy like William or Harry. He has always been an observer, tethered to the royal orbit by blood, but carving out his own path in a completely different world. His identity has always been tied to words, not crowns. First as a journalist, then as a food critic and author, always a man shaping truth into stories for the world to read. And here came the cruelest irony, striking like lightning. Hidden in his own quarters, behind layers of plaster and stone, lay words that defied everything anyone expected. These weren't polished articles or carefully crafted sentences. These were the raw, fearless, unfiltered words of Diana herself. For years, her voice had been softened, restrained, and redirected by the weight of the institution around her. Now, decades later, it spoke freely, and it could not be ignored. Diana had always feared that her story, her real story, would be softened into myth or erased by official narratives. She worried her vulnerabilities, her passion for the marginalized, and her palace struggles would vanish into footnotes. Yet here they were, intact, resurfacing in the most unexpected hands, the son of the woman who had replaced her in Charles's life. The twist was almost too shocking to believe. Her voice did not emerge in William's study or Harry's distant refuge. It appeared in the hands of a man whose life revolved around words and storytelling. Observers whispered that it was almost destiny, as if fate had chosen the one person capable of preserving her truth and perhaps giving it life again. For Tom, the moment must have been disorienting. He had built a life separate from the royal machine, often resisting being defined by Camilla. Yet now he stood before Diana's ghost, holding pages that could not only reshape his own family's story, but could rewrite the image of the monarchy itself, a chest sealed with dangerous secrets, the corridor of silence. When the final fragments of plaster crumbled away, the sight that greeted them sent a shiver through the room. Behind the broken wall, hidden for decades, stretched a narrow corridor cloaked in dust and shadow. The air that escaped was heavy, stale, suffocating, like time itself had been trapped in there with no way out. Every cautious step felt less like discovery and more like trespassing into something deliberately buried. This wasn't a royal escape route, no grand hallway lined with arches or broad stone steps meant to whisk kings and queens to safety. The corridor was cramped, oppressive, walls pressing in, forcing careful, uneasy movement. It didn't invite escape, it demanded silence. Concealment, not protection, had shaped this space. The deeper they ventured, the more unsettling it became. Dust clung to clothes and skin. Cobwebs draped corners like veils of forgotten memories, and the faint scuttle of unseen insects echoed in the quiet. Decades of absence had left this place untouched, as if the outside world had moved on while this chamber remained frozen in airless time. At the far end, flashlight beams fell upon something that stopped every breath. An iron-bound chest, squat and unyielding, its wood warped by centuries yet still solid, blackened iron bands gripping it like a fortress. Thick layers of dust coated it, but beneath that cloak, the chest radiated intent. It hadn't drifted here by chance. Its position was perfect, centered in the alcove, placed deliberately to remain hidden until the right moment. The lock, though rusted, caught the light, a quiet testament to resilience. Whoever had secured this chest had wanted it sealed, meant to endure. This wasn't clutter discarded by time. This wasn't a forgotten trunk abandoned during renovations. This was purpose buried in secrecy, waiting to be uncovered. This was an object hidden with purpose, preserved in secrecy, left intentionally. The silence of the corridor seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on everyone standing before the chest. This was no triumph. It felt like intrusion, as if they had broken into a chamber where secrets were deliberately laid to rest. Even the air seemed to whisper warnings. Do not disturb what has been entombed. What secrets did this chest guard? Why had it been sealed so carefully, hidden so deeply, placed in a corridor built not for escape, but for erasure? The questions swirled, heavier with every passing second, each one darker than the last. This was no accident. This was a message, a burden from the past, waiting, perhaps unwillingly, to be unearthed. The chest hadn't been waiting to be found. It had been waiting to be opened. But what lay inside? Jewels, forgotten heirlooms, or something far more powerful, something that could shake the crown itself. The air inside the corridor was already thick with anticipation, but it went still, utterly silent, when the iron-bound chest was dragged into the open. Its weight alone screamed importance. The lock clung stubbornly, decades of resistance etched into its metal. As the final hinge groaned and the lid creaked upward, everyone froze. For a heartbeat, there was wild hope, gold, jewels, priceless treasures fit for royalty. Then, reality hit. There were no crowns, no gemstones, no glittering riches. Instead, the chest held stacks of fragile papers, bound with ribbons faded to ghostly greys and pale blues. The parchment was yellowed with age, the ink bleeding softly into its fibres. At first, it seemed almost ordinary, mere scraps where treasure had been expected. Then the handwriting appeared, unmistakable, personal, deliberate. In that instant, the air shifted from curiosity to stunned disbelief. The penmanship was instantly recognizable. It was her hand, Diana's. These were not polished letters meant for public eyes, nor carefully curated statements she had once allowed in interviews. These were something far more intimate. Private journals, raw fragments of her unguarded truth. Each line throbbed with emotion, every page whispered confessions never meant for strangers to read. The words carried no filter, no performance. They were the pure, unrestrained outpourings of a woman who had felt unseen, unheard, trapped inside the gilded walls of royalty. The journals overflowed with honesty. Some passages burned with aching loneliness, painting vivid pictures of nights spent in silence, where even surrounded by grandeur, she felt invisible. Others crackled with frustration and quiet defiance, as if she were writing against a world that refused to acknowledge her pain. And running through it all was the haunting fear that her story, her very voice, might one day be silenced completely, buried under the weight of the crown and its relentless machinery of image and control. What made the discovery even more staggering was the intimacy of the writing. These were not history book statements or legacies shaped for posterity. They were letters to herself, meant to exist only in the safety of secrecy. And yet, here they were, hidden behind a wall in Camilla's son's bedroom, lying in silence for decades until fate forced them into the light. For those present, the realization was overwhelming. They were not holding artifacts of wealth, they were holding fragments of a soul. Each ribbon-bound stack carried pieces of Diana herself, her voice, her pain, her truth. Resurrected in ink long after her passing, the air seemed to pulse with her presence, as though the room itself carried the weight of what had been uncovered. This was no treasure of gold or jewels. This was far more dangerous, far more powerful. It was Diana's unfiltered voice, a voice that refused to be erased, one that threatened to unravel everything the monarchy thought it had buried. But why here? Why in Tom's bedroom? And who is he? Could it be that the secret was always meant to surface through words, that the man best equipped to carry it forward is the one whose life revolves around storytelling? The palace and public alike were stunned, not just by what had been found, but by its astonishing location. This revelation didn't emerge from a secret royal archive or some forgotten chamber in an ancient palace. No, it was hidden in the most personal and unexpected place, behind the bedroom wall of Tom Parker B.S., Camilla's eldest son. The intimacy of the setting made the discovery all the more shocking, all the more profound. Tom had never carried the weight of royal titles, nor lived under the suffocating glare that defined William and Harry. He remained an observer rather than a participant, tethered to royalty by blood and circumstance, yet carving his own life in a completely different sphere. His identity was always tied to words, not crowns. First as a journalist, later as a food critic and author, always a man whose craft revolved around language and narrative. And here lay the cruelest irony, striking like lightning. Sealed behind layers of plaster and stone in his own quarters were words that defied expectation. These were not carefully edited articles or sentences shaped to satisfy an audience. No, they were raw, unguarded, fearless words of Diana herself. For years, her truth had been softened, restrained and redirected by the weight of the institution. And yet now, it spoke freely, impossible to ignore. For years, Diana had feared that her story, her real story, would one day be softened into myth or erased by official narratives. She worried that her vulnerabilities, her passion for the marginalized, and her struggles inside the palace would be reduced to footnotes, polished and sanitized for history. And now, decades later, her most private words, untouched, raw, unshaped, had surfaced in the most unexpected hands, the son of the woman who replaced her in Charles's life. The twist was so striking, so charged with meaning, that few could believe it was mere coincidence. Diana's hidden voice had not appeared in William's study, nor in Harry's distant refuge, but behind the walls of a man whose life revolved entirely around words and storytelling. Observers whispered that it was almost destiny, as if fate itself had ensured her unfiltered truth would land in someone uniquely equipped to understand it, preserve it, and perhaps one day give it the life it deserved. For Tom, the discovery must have been disorienting. He had built a life apart from the royal machine, resisting being defined by his connection to Camilla. Yet here he stood, holding pages that could alter not just his family's story, but the image of the monarchy itself. The symbolism was almost too perfect. Diana's voice, once silenced by the crown, had risen again. In the quiet sanctuary of a writer, Tom Parker, B.S., had become the unlikely keeper of a voice the palace had tried to bury. But what did this mean for the monarchy? How far would the echoes reach? Diana's words spread through the palace like wildfire, a spark catching dry kindling, igniting whispers that refused to be contained. What began as a quiet, almost accidental discovery now surged through corridors long accustomed to discretion and silence, shaking the foundations of tradition and secrecy with every hushed conversation. The air within Buckingham Palace and beyond grew thick with tension. This was no ordinary rumour, no tabloid scandal that could be silenced with a polished statement. This was different. This was real. This was Diana herself, reaching across decades with her own hand, her voice daring the monarchy to confront a truth it had long tried to bury. Courtiers, usually calm and composed, began whispering urgently, their voices carrying through hallways like nervous tremors. Should the chest be opened to the world, exposing the fragile honesty of Diana's words, or should it be locked away again, perhaps even destroyed, in the name of protecting the crown? The palace knew crisis. Entire systems existed to shield the monarchy from public scrutiny, to manage perception and preserve image. But this discovery offered no easy fix. These were not idle tales, gossip, or sensationalized claims. They were Diana's words, raw, unfiltered, impossible to ignore. Every page pulsed with her confessions. The aching loneliness behind the smile, the quiet terror of being unseen, and the haunting dread that her truth might be erased by the very institution she had served. These writings were more than paper. They were a heartbeat, a soul calling across time, demanding to be heard. The implications rattled royal authority. Legal advisors were summoned, tasked with untangling every angle. Did these writings belong to Diana's sons as her personal property? Or, by some strange twist, had they become crown possessions, subject to control, concealment, or selective disclosure by the monarchy? No precedent existed. Every choice carried danger. Every decision risked scandal. And at the centre, King Charles felt the heaviest weight. This was more than a challenge to the institution. It was deeply personal. To see the private words of his late wife emerge from behind the walls of his current wife's eldest son's bedroom was almost unbearable, a confrontation with memory that cut sharper than any headline ever could. It felt as if the past had stormed into King Charles's present, refusing to be ignored, demanding attention, and tearing apart the fragile calm he had fought so hard to maintain, for himself and for the crown. The monarchy had weathered rumours before, survived waves of speculation, relentless criticism, and scandals that seemed designed to break it. Rumours could be denied, dismissed, or buried. But Diana's words, written in her own hand, they hit with the force of undeniable truth. And now those words had emerged, not from dusty archives, not from staged interviews, but from a hidden chamber behind Camilla's son's private quarters. This wasn't just a secret, it was a reckoning the monarchy could no longer sidestep. But what about William and Harry? Would they let these words stay buried forever, or would their actions give their mother's silenced voice the attention it demanded? For the princes, the discovery cut far deeper than politics, palace protocols, or public image. It struck at memory, at the raw wounds they carried. It was intensely personal, shockingly intimate, unbearably heavy. The moment they realized the chest held their mother's private writings, the air seemed to thicken. These weren't polished letters or carefully edited statements meant to charm the public. These were Diana's unguarded thoughts, her raw heart exposed for the first time. Reading them felt like stepping into a time capsule of her very soul. Honest, broken, defiant, hopeful, afraid. Her voice leapt from the pages, pulling her sons into a space where grief, love, and memory collided in one unstoppable wave. It was as if Diana had reached across time, speaking directly to them, bypassing the crown, the courtiers, and even history itself. William, always cautious and protective of the monarchy's fragile image, immediately felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. He feared that if these deeply personal confessions reached the press, they would be shredded for headlines, sensationalized until their meaning was lost. To him, restraint was protection, a shield not just for the monarchy, but for Diana's dignity. He wanted to preserve her voice, not watch it be turned into tabloid fodder. Harry, by contrast, felt no hesitation. Freed by distance, both literal and emotional, he was furious. The fact that their mother's words had been hidden in Camilla's son's private quarters felt like betrayal layered upon betrayal. Diana had feared her voice would be silenced, and now, decades later, here was proof. For Harry, caution was a crime. He demanded immediate transparency, insisting her truth should not be filtered, contained, or controlled by the very institution that had often tried to bury it. Their shared grief bound them, but their instincts collided with searing intensity. Long-buried wounds, shaped by roles, choices, and life paths, rose to the surface. William, the heir, approached with care and calculation. Harry, the free-spirited spare, demanded openness and truth. Both sought to honor their mother's memory, yet their methods diverged sharply, revealing the tension between duty and rebellion, tradition and freedom, love and loss. To outsiders, the rift seemed insurmountable, a chasm carved by years of difference. Yet beneath the visible tension lay an undeniable bond, forged by love and shared sorrow. Diana's voice, once thought erased by time, had returned. Those long-hidden words called out with urgency, demanding acknowledgement, understanding, and a promise they would never be silenced again. No matter their differences, neither William nor Harry could allow her words to be buried a second time. No matter their differences, neither William nor Harry could allow those words to be buried again. For them, this was not about power or politics. It was about love, memory, and justice for the woman who had given them both life and purpose. And in that moment, even amid division, they carried the same vow. Diana's voice would live on. William and Harry promised that their mother's words would never be silenced again. But beyond her journals, what kept Diana alive in the hearts of the world? What made her legacy endure? Diana's rediscovered writings did not simply add a few hidden pages to the royal record. They reopened a chapter the monarchy had worked for decades to carefully close. What emerged from behind the wall was not just paper, ink, and frayed ribbons, but a voice that had once shaken the world, now speaking again with startling clarity. For the royal family, this was not merely a discovery. It was a reckoning. For years, Princess Diana had been remembered through carefully curated images in public memory. The radiant humanitarian, the glamorous yet relatable princess, the woman who entered AIDS wards when fear and stigma kept others away, the devoted mother whose love softened the rigidity of royal protocol, the global icon who campaigned tirelessly against landmines. Her compassion defined her, her empathy reshaped how the monarchy was seen, and her charitable work inspired millions across continents. Yet these journals revealed something deeper, the heart behind the public figure. The Diana within these pages was not only the charitable, camera-adored princess, but also a woman who grappled with fear, wrestled with invisibility, and questioned whether her truth would ever survive beyond the palace walls. These writings offered a window into her soul, a soul that had loved, suffered, hoped, and defied in equal measure. They reminded the world that Diana was not just a symbol, not merely a legacy shaped by others' expectations. She was a woman who lived fiercely and vulnerably, and whose unfiltered voice refused to be silenced. It was no wonder that the discovery left the palace reeling. These were not treasures to be locked away, nor relics to be displayed. They were confessions alive with the power to change how Diana was remembered. Not as myth, not as memory, but as voice. A voice unyielding, a voice undeniable, a voice impossible to silence again. And that, above all, is why what was found behind Camilla's son's bedroom wall did not merely surprise the royal family. It left them speechless. What lies ahead for the monarchy now that Diana's voice rises once more? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on every twist in this unfolding story.